my talk in English as I saw that there were people coming from France and Belgium and Italy, and I hoped not to have to hear any presentation in French or Italian, so I decided not to speak in German in return. I'm going to elaborate a little bit more on the Frank Lloyd Wright's Larkin building that has been introduced yesterday, and maybe complicate the notion of Bürosaal that has been given in the last talk. A first look, impressions of the Larkin building. In 1924, the German architect Erich Mendelsohn visited the United States of America for the first time in his life. The steamboat arrived in New York City, where Mendelsohn spent several days before he took the train to Buffalo at the shores of Lake Erie. On the agenda, Frank Lloyd Wright's Larkin Administration Building. On October 22nd, Mendelsohn wrote in a letter to his wife, "Wright's administration office for the Larkin Soap Company was a great experience. It is brutally close to the street, with a wide open entrance in glass and metal. A harbor for those going into the building, who look into the heart of it at once. No secrets, no obscurities, an immediate aura of work and reality. The interior is of great energy and receptiveness. I am sitting on the inner court in the great hall, which you know from my photographs. 4 floors lit on all sides give out onto this hall. There are 1,000 people at work here. You hear no single sounds. The directors are only separated from the employees by a railing. This has a double aspect, an incentive and democracy." Erich Mendelsohn had come to America in order to discover sources of inspiration. In the Larkin building, he found a model of the motto "Form follows function," to which he and other European modernist architects aspired. The way the architects experienced the Larkin building seems to thwart notions of bureaucracy framed by his contemporary Max Weber, who nourished the perception of the office as a, quote, living machine. In contrast to the German architect, who regarded the Larkin building as a vital democratic space, the German sociologist, even though using the word living, stressed the mechanical nature of the ideal type office and thus considered it as a threat to freedom. Quote, "Together with the inanimate machine, it is busy fabricating the shell of bondage, which man will perhaps be forced to inhabit someday." Looking through today's eyes at spaces like the Larkin typewriting pool, one tends to believe that this dystopic vision already had become true in the Larkin building. However, a closer look at the building reveals an architecture too complex to boil it down to the one notion of the office as a machine. In my talk, I am going to show that at the same time it was, as Mendelsohn perceived it, living architecture. Machine organization, the mechanics of office work. In 1911, Frederick Winslow Taylor published his Principles of Scientific Management. Subsequently, his disciples, such as William Henry Leffingwell, transferred his ideas from the factory to the office. Like Taylor, many of them had a background in engineering. They now adapted their mechanical concepts in order to enhance the workers' efficiency. Scientific management analyzed tasks and processes in order to eliminate unnecessary operations and motions. Before long, the so-called straight line flow of work was regarded as the major key to efficiency. Consequently, working tasks were organized as linear routines, as in the chart on the left side, and then applied to the physical office. The chart on the right side, and then applied to the physical office. The floor plan, I'm thinking wrong. The floor plan on the right side shows how an inefficient zigzag working process could be transformed into a straight line. Both charts were presented in canonical textbooks on office management in order to promote this diagram as a graphical tool. Unfortunately, no such diagram is conveyed for the Larkin building, and most likely it never existed. Nonetheless, the organization of the office achieved the objective of the straight-line flow of work. One of the major textbooks on office management was published in 1919 by the efficiency expert Lee Galloway. On the frontispiece, he presented a picture of the Larkin building as an exemplary modern office building. He commented, quote, "The clerical work is so arranged that there is a continual flow of work from desk to desk and from department to department," unquote. Thus, he agreed with Mendelssohn, who praised the, quote, "spatial interplay of the separate wings, the way they flow together," unquote. Both saw the continual flow of work as one of the major achievements in the Larkin building. The architecture of the Larkin building proves that the ideas and concepts promoted by Taylor and his disciples were already vivid in the organization of offices around the turn of the century. The circulation of mail through the office exemplified the ideal of a systematically organized flow of work. The office of the Larkin Company processed several thousand letters every day except on Sundays. The mail arrived in scheduled deliveries and was driven into the basement of the building, where it was loaded into elevators and taken to the third floor. Here, the letters were sorted and then transferred to so-called estate groups, one of which you see on the photograph, that were located on the galleries surrounding the light court. The groups were handled in a systematic way. Desks were arranged to orderly rows that could be supervised easily. The further processing was, as the architectural historian Jack Quinan observed, quote, "primarily downward or gravitational," unquote. This effort against the waste of energy was consistent with Taylorist conceptions. All the fittings and furnishings were designed in order to be consistent, time-saving, fireproof, cleanly, and easy cleanable. The chairs, for example, were attached to the desks in order to admit for easy cleaning at night. Due to its elaborate organization and architecture, the Larkin building was perceived as a smoothly running machine by contemporary witnesses. In 1907, the Businessman's Magazine featured an article on the Larkin building. After describing its benefits, the author concluded, quote, "There are the departments, each steadily, quietly rotating about its own axis, yet in perfect coordination with the rest, and each so delicately meshed to its neighbor that one helps the other and in no way interrupts its progress. It is enterprise, American enterprise, that drives the wheels. Carefully organized systems and methods are the jewel bearings, goodwill, the lubricant." Here, while underpinning the notion of the office as a machine, Whitmire at the same time referred to a quality that was not due to organized systems alone, the goodwill of people. Work ethic, the architecture of goodwill. In 1925, 1 year after Mendelssohn's trip to America, the 50th anniversary of the Larkin Company was celebrated. A Festschrift presented several drawings of the Larkin building. The view from the so-called inspiration point, for instance, was supposed to convey a representable image. The accompanying text added to the reader's imagination. Stand, if you please, one moment at inspiration point, with us at inspiration point at the very top of the administration building. Look down floor after floor through the great sunlit court. 'Tis then, only then, that you glimpse the soul of the Larkin business, for the teeming hive of industry below is intent on service. Customers had been invited for years to take a guided tour through the Larkin factories. Tour guides explicated the modern scientific and production methods and the company's concern for employee welfare. On the tours, the inspiration point usually was on the agenda. Standing on the topmost floor, the tour guides highlighted the benefits of the Larkin building for the office employees. Fireproof steel furniture with leather cushion provided for comfort and safety, the skylight and the windows for ample daylight, a ventilation system for purified and well-tempered air. Alongside the main building was the atrium, with the atrium and the galleries. Wright had built an annex building to house service areas for the workers. There were restrooms and individual lockers, an infirmary with a physician and a trained nurse in charge, a classroom, and the headquarters of the Young Women's Christian Association. According to the official guideline, the tour guide finally was supposed to draw this conclusion. Quote, "All these things Larkin Company does to promote the spirit of love and cooperation among its employees, even to the character-building qualities between the pillars of the court on this floor." Thus, the guide referred to the inscriptions at fifth floor level. There were 14 sets of three-word groups such as thought, feeling, action, or faith, hope, charity. Additionally, there were 2 quotes from the Sermon on the Mount, der Bergpredigt. This symbolic design had 2 effects. Firstly, it created an uplifting atmosphere for the hundreds of office workers that were supposed to do their best. Secondly, and at least as important, it conveyed the message to the customers that the best was done in order to fulfill their needs. As Howard Stanger has shown, the development of a unique corporate culture played an important role for the success of the Larkin Company. Built on employee welfare and obliging customer service, the family spirit was reinforced by the architecture of the office building. According to Jonathan Lippmann, Wright used his architectural language to establish a, quote, consecrated space, unquote. Lippmann presents the Larkin building as the first of Wright's spaces that could be compared to the sanctuary of a church. Quote, Wright determined that the main activity occurring in a public building should be housed in a consecrated space, that is, one that would provide a symbolic and ennobling focus for the group consciousness, unquote. Similarly, Jack Quinan points out that Wright shared a strong belief in the virtue of work with the Larkin executives. Quote, in the Light Court, work was exalted almost to a religious level, unquote. Having in mind Max Weber's arguments on the relation between Protestant work ethic and capitalist spirit, it is noteworthy that both Quinan and Lippmann rather refer to American transcendentalist philosophy than to religious tradition. Quinan says the Larkin Light Court can be seen to exemplify Emerson's belief in the unity of all things and nature and in the aspiration of matter to a spiritual ideal. Reading these words and looking at the drawing Wright prepared for his Wasmuth portfolio of 1910 leads the way to the third notion of the office eminent in the Larkin building, the office as an organism. Organic architecture, the principles of natural growth. Wright's Wasmuth portfolio was the first monograph published on Wright's work. It presented the architect's pioneering building as well as his philosophy of organic architecture. Both appealed to European avant-garde architects such as Erich Mendelssohn. Dismissing academic Beaux-Arts architecture, Wright advocated for, quote, buildings growing in response to actual needs fitted into the environment, unquote. In the study of plants and animals, he saw a key to living architecture. One of the most prominent forerunners of the idea that a building should be modeled on the principles of natural growth was Louis Henry Sullivan. He and his partner, the engineer Dankmar Adler, were protagonists in the development of the tall office building in Chicago in the last decades of the 19th century. Wright, who called Sullivan Lieber Meister, was trained in their office. This experience was a crucial factor for the Larkin executives when they commissioned Wright. Today, Sullivan usually is remembered for coining the motto, form follows function, even though he was not the first to use this phrase. In his 1896 article, The Tall Office Building Artistically Considered, Sullivan outlined his ideas about the tripartition of high-rise office buildings. With the Guarantee Building in Buffalo shown on the left side, he put them into practice. The facade of the building reflects and forms the three major functions: storefronts at ground level, 10 identically conceived office floors, the mechanics of building infrastructure on the topmost floor. To Sullivan, this division complied to a law he deemed to be universal. Quote, "It is the pervading law of all things organic and inorganic, of all things physical and metaphysical, of all things human and all things superhuman, of all true manifestations of the head, of the heart, of the soul, that the life is recognizable in its expression, that form ever follows function. This is the law." The motto, "Form follows function," reflects the division of labor between architect and engineer that was common in office building construction around 1900. Decisions were based on economic considerations, on technical requirements, and on building laws. The artistic scope of the architect was limited to facade decoration and roof silhouettes. Consequently, the interior office layouts that were based on a standardized unit systems virtually looked alike. Wright criticized this spatial concept. In his autobiography of 1943, he recalled, quote, "The interiors consisted of boxes beside boxes or inside boxes called rooms. All boxes were inside a complicated outside boxing. Each function was properly box to box. I could see little sense in this inhibition." Wright explained that he first consciously began to destroy the box in the Larkin building. By making the stair towers into freestanding individual features at the corners of the main building, he provided the open office space the Larkin building is famous for. Maturing Sullivan's credo, Wright preached the unity of function and form, quote, "Form and function are one," unquote. Instead of applying ornamentation to an engineering structure, he designed each building as an organic whole. Wright asserted, "It shall become in its atmosphere as pure and elevating in its humble way as the trees and the flowers are in their perfectly appointed way." As for the Larkin building, he was convinced that he had achieved his goal. Quote, "There may be some to question whether it is beautiful or not, but insofar as it is simple and true, it will live," unquote. The Larkin building was conceived as an organism, as a church, and as a machine. Due to Wright's holistic approach, all the three conceptions were consistent with one another. However, aiming at timeless universality, all three of them were challenged by changing needs and conditions. Second thoughts, the swinging chair problem. In February 1914, a chief clerk in the accounting department, Mr. Whitney, wrote a memo to the office manager, Mr. Heath, complaining about the attached swinging chair he had to use. He asked to replace it by a wooden swivel chair and even offered to pay for it by himself. Nothing happened. Thus, weeks later, Whitney insisted, "Mr. Heath, about 10 days ago, I sent you a memo and a swivel chair replacing the swinging chair at my desk and how uncomfortable the swinging chair was. The chair is still just as awkward and uncomfortable." Finally, Mr. Heath commented on the problem. "The office manager has endeavored to hold this building and its equipment intact. If we didn't, nothing would stand still very long. Desks would be moved, desks would be exchanged, light would be changed, ventilation would be changed, air would be changed, and I am not quite sure that we would not build the building over again." With all the criticism of discomfort, etc., that we listen to so patiently, still we have the best provision for employees that I know of in any large country, in any other large office in this country. And he continued, "The policy of the office manager's department is to maintain uniform conditions, and we have consistently done so within our jurisdiction. We do not claim any authority over any other department housed in this building. If other departments wish to show this department the courtesy of conforming to its policy, it will be an aid in our work. If they do not, then they have the right to do as they please, and some of them have already made this election. What followed were several memos, crossing levels of hierarchy, eventually carrying the problem to the head of the company. Unfortunately, there's no evidence whether Mr. Whitney got the swivel chair he longed for or not. What I want to point out is one issue that strikes me about the swinging chair problem. The discussion proves that the Larkin office really was a living space, not only in its organic conception, but also in terms of change that happened. At the same time, it illustrates how difficult it was to keep the office running like a clockwork, to uphold the family spirit, and to timelessly achieve the unity of function and form. Thank you.